Power doesn't mean a damn thing when you can't feel your own legs. He ruled the city's underbelly, but lived trapped in a quiet, sterile hell. Until a severely overworked maid, too exhausted to fear him, collapsed by his bedside and made the devil remember how to smile. The estate was an architectural masterpiece of glass steel and imported Italian marble. To Daniel, it was a very expensive tomb. He sat in the center of his expansive bedroom, strapped into a custom-built motorized wheelchair. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights bled through the relentless autumn rain. It was his city. He bled for it, killed for it, and ultimately gave the lower half of his spine for it. 3 years ago, a rival syndicate decided a car bomb was the best way to negotiate territory. They missed his heart. They hit his mobility. Daniel took a slow drag from his cigarette, letting the heavy grey smoke curl past his face. He wasn't supposed to smoke. The doctors were very clear about blood circulation. Daniel didn't care. When you were 32, paralyzed from the waist down and running a criminal empire through proxy lieutenants, you smoked the damn cigarette. A soft knock echoed through the heavy oak doors. It wasn't the rhythmic, confident rap of his underboss. It was the hesitant, obligatory knock of the help. "In," Daniel barked. His voice was a rasp of disuse, dry and sharp. The door opened. It wasn't the usual terrified teenager they sent up to clean his quarters. It was a new woman, Naomi. He knew her name because he made it a point to know the background of every living soul who crossed his threshold. 26. No criminal ties. She worked 3 jobs. This was her 4th night shift for an agency that didn't ask questions about bloodstains on the carpets or the armed guards in the hallways. She walked in carrying a bucket of cleaning supplies. She was a black woman with dark, exhausted eyes and hair tied back in a messy, practical knot. Her uniform was a size too big, hanging off her narrow frame, but she moved with a heavy, deliberate momentum. It was the walk of someone who hadn't slept a full 8 hours since the Obama administration. "Evening," she said. Her voice was flat, not rude, but utterly devoid of the trembling reverence Daniel was accustomed to. She didn't wait for a response. She set the bucket down by the mahogany dresser and pulled out a microfiber cloth. The scent of cheap lemon artificial cleaner cut through the stale smell of expensive tobacco. Daniel watched her. Usually the maids kept their heads down, scrubbed furiously, and bolted from the room as if he might pull a gun on them for breathing too loudly. Naomi just sprayed the glass surface of his side table and wiped it down in slow, methodical circles. "You're blocking the television," Daniel said. The screen was off, but he felt the urge to test her. Naomi paused. She looked at the blank 80-inch screen mounted on the wall. Then she looked at him. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. "I'll be done in 2 minutes. You can stare at your reflection in the black screen then." She turned back to the table. Daniel blinked. For a second, the sheer audacity of it short-circuited his temper. He gripped the armrests of his chair, the leather creaking under his knuckles. "Excuse me," I said. "I'll be out of your way in 2 minutes." Naomi repeated, her tone unchanging. She sprayed another mist of lemon cleaner. "There's a coffee ring here. If I don't scrub it out, the head housekeeper will dock my pay. And I need the pay. So unless you're going to shoot me, please let me finish wiping down this table." She wasn't trying to be brave. That was the jarring part. Daniel knew bravado. He knew the puffed-up chests of men trying to prove they weren't afraid of the crippled boss. Naomi wasn't puffing out her chest. Her shoulders were slumped. The bags under her eyes looked like bruises. She was simply too tired to care that she was talking back to the head of the largest Korean crime syndicate on the East Coast. Daniel slowly relaxed his grip on the chair. The anger dissipated, replaced by a cold, cynical curiosity. "Take your time," he muttered, taking another drag of his cigarette. She ignored him. She scrubbed the stain, moved to the bookshelves, dusted the spines of first editions he never read, and emptied the wastebasket. She moved like a machine with a dying battery, efficient but lacking any spark. When she finished, she picked up her bucket. "I'll be back on Thursday. Try to use a coaster." She walked out, pulling the heavy door shut behind her. Daniel sat in the silence of his room. He looked at the side table. It was spotless. For the first time in 36 months, someone had looked at him and seen a minor inconvenience in their workday, rather than a monster in a wheelchair. He didn't smile. The muscles in his face had forgotten how to do that. But the suffocating pressure in his chest felt just for a moment a fraction lighter. 2 months passed. Thursday and Sunday nights became the only anchors in Daniel's blurred, monotonous weeks. The underworld was shifting. There were rumors of a mutiny within his own ranks. The men who used to bow to him were starting to look at his wheelchair a little too long, their eyes calculating. Daniel spent his days aggressively crushing those thoughts, barking orders into phones, arranging hits, and managing the sprawling, violent logistics of his empire. By nightfall, the phantom pains in his dead legs would flare up a cruel neurological joke, shooting invisible fire through nerves that no longer functioned. He refused painkillers. Painkillers made him slow. Slow meant dead. It was 2 a.m. on a Sunday. The house was finally empty of his capos. They had held a 4-hour meeting in the adjacent study, leaving behind the stench of spilled bourbon cigar ash and tension. Daniel was in his bedroom, transferred into his low, massive bed. He was propped up on a mountain of pillows, staring blankly at the shadows, stretching across the ceiling. His legs throbbed with a burning ache. He ground his teeth, his jaw tight, sweating through his silk shirt. The door clicked open. Naomi stepped in. She looked worse than usual. It was pouring rain outside, and the hem of her dark pants was soaked. She had clearly just finished cleaning the disaster zone in the study. She carried a fresh pitcher of ice water and a stack of clean towels. She didn't speak. She rarely did. Over the weeks they had developed a strange, silent ecosystem. She cleaned. He watched. Occasionally he would deliberately leave a book out of place, just to see the tiny, annoyed twitch of her brow as she fixed it. It was petty. He didn't care. Naomi walked to the bedside table. She swapped the stale water pitcher for the fresh one. As she turned to place the towels in the adjoining bathroom, her foot caught on the edge of the thick Persian rug. She stumbled. The towels hit the floor. Naomi caught herself against the edge of the heavy mahogany bed frame, her breath hitching. Daniel shifted his upper body, tensing. Careful. Naomi didn't stand back up. She stayed knelt on the floor, gripping the bed frame. Her head dropped forward, her chin resting against her chest. Naomi. Daniel said, his voice dropping an octave, instinctual authority bleeding through. Get up. She let out a long, ragged exhale. Just give me a second, please. Her voice cracked. It was a tiny sound, barely louder than the rain hitting the window glass, but it echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Daniel froze. He was a man who commanded a small army of violent criminals. He knew how to break bones, how to extort, how to terrify. He had absolutely no idea what to do with a crying woman on his bedroom floor. But she wasn't crying. He watched her closely. Her breathing was just heavy, shallow. Are you hurt? He asked. The question felt clumsy in his mouth. No, she mumbled. She slid down slightly her back, coming to rest against the base of his mattress. She was sitting on the floor, legs pulled up her head, leaning back against the side of his bed. Just tired. I just need a minute before I walk to the bus stop. Daniel looked at the clock. 2:15 a.m. Buses stop running at 2. I know, she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut. I'm going to walk to the 24-hour diner. Wait for the 5 a.m. route. Daniel frowned. The diner was 3 miles away through a neighborhood his own men considered too rough to walk alone at night. You're walking 3 miles in a thunderstorm. I have an umbrella. She slurred slightly. He looked down at her. From his position on the bed, he could see the top of her head. He could see the frayed collar of her shirt, the tension knotted tight in her shoulders. He looked at her hands resting in her lap. The knuckles were dry, the cuticles peeling from harsh chemicals. There was a small faded ink tattoo of a sparrow on her wrist. "Call a cab. Put it on the house account," Daniel said. She didn't answer. Naomi. Silence. Daniel dragged his upper body closer to the edge of the bed, leaning over. She was asleep. Her chest rose and fell in a slow, rhythmic cadence. Her face usually pulled tight with stress, and exhaustion had gone entirely slack. Her lips were parted slightly. She looked younger. She looked utterly, terrifyingly vulnerable. She had fallen asleep in the bedroom of a Mafia boss, sitting on the floor, leaning against his mattress. Daniel stared at her. A profound, confusing wave of emotion crashed into his chest. It wasn't lust. It wasn't pity. It was awe. He spent his life surrounded by men who couldn't sleep because they were terrified of waking up with a knife in their throats. He himself spent hours staring at the ceiling, waiting for the shadows to move. Paranoia was the air they breathed. And here was this woman, a civilian, a maid making minimum wage, sleeping soundly at the feet of a monster, simply because she was too exhausted to stay awake. She trusted him. Or more accurately, she didn't view him as a threat. To her, he wasn't the ruthless syndicate boss. He was just the grumpy guy in the wheelchair with the coffee rings on his table. Daniel reached out. His hand hovered over her shoulder. He could easily wake her. He should wake her. It was wildly inappropriate. Dangerous even to have staff sleeping in his quarters. If his guards walked in, they wouldn't understand. His hand dropped. He pulled back. Carefully using his immense upper body strength, Daniel dragged himself to the far edge of the bed, reaching for the heavy cashmere throw blanket folded at the foot. He grabbed the corner and hauled himself back over. He leaned down his abs, screaming in protest at the awkward angle, and dropped the blanket over her. It landed clumsily, covering her shoulders and pooling in her lap. Naomi shifted slightly at the warmth, letting out a soft sigh, and leaned her head deeper into the mattress. Daniel lay back against his pillows. The phantom fire in his legs was still there, burning away. The rain was still lashing against the glass. The mutiny in his ranks was still brewing. But as he listened to the soft, steady sound of Naomi breathing beside his bed, the corners of Daniel's mouth twitched. The muscles fought it. They had been locked in a scowl for 3 years. It felt unnatural, stretching the skin of his cheeks, pulling at the corners of his eyes. But it happened anyway. Daniel smiled in the dark. Morning broke over the city in streaks of pale, unforgiving grey. Naomi woke with a sharp inhale. Her neck was stiff, her shoulder ached, and she was inexplicably, terrifyingly warm. She blinked, her vision blurring as her brain tried to reconcile the soft, heavy weight over her body with the harsh reality of her life. She wasn't on the bus. She wasn't in her cramped, drafty apartment. She was sitting on a plush rug, leaning against a bed frame that cost more than she would make in a decade. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her veins. She scrambled back, kicking the cashmere blanket off her legs. She scrambled to her feet, her hands flying to her hair, her uniform. Daniel was awake. He was sitting exactly where he had been hours ago, his back against the pillows. He was holding a sleek tablet, a cup of black coffee steaming on his bedside table. He didn't look up from his screen. "You snore," he said. His voice was flat, carrying no malice, only a dry observation. Naomi froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had fallen asleep. On the job. In the bedroom of a man who commanded a criminal syndicate. People disappeared for less. She swallowed hard, her throat painfully dry. "I am so sorry. I sat down for just a second. I didn't mean to. The blanket is dry clean only." Daniel interrupted, turning a page on his tablet. "Leave it on the chair." Naomi stared at him. She expected rage. She expected the cold, dismissive command to get out, followed by a call to her agency to ensure she never worked again. Instead, he was reading the morning financials. She picked up the heavy blanket, folding it with shaking hands, and draped it over a leather armchair. "I'll go. You won't be billed for my hours past 2. "Sit down," Daniel said. It wasn't a request. It was an order delivered with the quiet, absolute authority of a man who was obeyed without question. Naomi stopped halfway to the door. She looked back at him, her dark eyes wide, assessing the threat. "I have another shift at noon," she said cautiously. Daniel finally looked up. He took in her pale face, the frantic pulse beating at the base of her throat. He pressed a button on the side of his bed. A moment later, the heavy oak doors opened. One of his guards, a massive man in a tailored suit, stepped in carrying a silver tray. The guard didn't look at Naomi. He set the tray on the low glass table by the window and walked out, closing the door silently. "I ordered breakfast," Daniel said. "They brought too much. I hate wasting food. Eat." Naomi looked at the tray. It was loaded with eggs, thick-cut bacon, fresh fruit, and a carafe of orange juice. Her stomach gave a violent, embarrassing rumble. She hadn't eaten a hot meal in 2 days, but survival instincts ran deep. "I'm not a charity case," she said, her voice tightening. "I didn't say you were," Daniel replied, turning his attention back to the tablet. "I said I hate wasting food. Consider it a hazard bonus for putting up with my temper last week. Eat the damn eggs, Naomi." She hesitated. The smell of the bacon was intoxicating. Slowly, she walked over to the table and sat on the edge of the sofa. She picked up a fork. She started slow, but within seconds, the sheer primal need for calories took over. She cleared half the tray in 5 minutes. Daniel watched her from the corner of his eye. He felt a strange, tight knot in his chest loosen. He had bought off politicians, judges, and rival bosses with briefcases of unmarked bills. None of it had given him the profound satisfaction of watching this exhausted woman eat a plate of scrambled eggs. Over the next 3 weeks, the silence between them cracked. It didn't shatter into friendly banter. Daniel was too cynical, and Naomi was too tired. But it evolved into a blunt, unguarded honesty. She learned that he hated the rain because the dampness made his nerve pain worse. He learned that her youngest sister had severe asthma, and her medical bills were the reason Naomi was working herself into an early grave. "You could let me pay them," Daniel said one evening. He was sitting in his chair, smoking. Naomi was dusting the bookshelves. "No," she said without turning around. "It's a fraction of what I make in an hour. It means nothing to me." "It means everything to me," Naomi countered, facing him. She held a feather duster like a weapon. "The men you employ, the people you deal with, they owe you. And when they owe you, you own them. You don't own me, Daniel." He stared at her. She was the only person in the world who used his first name without a title attached. He took a drag of his cigarette. "I don't want to own you. Then let me clean your shelves and pay my own bills," she said, turning back to the books. Daniel smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. He respected her stubbornness, but he was still a Mafia boss. He didn't take no for an answer. He just found a different way to ask the question. 2 days later, Naomi arrived for her shift, looking confused. "My agency doubled my hourly rate," she told him, as she emptied his wastebasket. "They said it was a clerical error from 6 months ago." Daniel didn't look up from his laptop. "Fascinating how incompetent corporate payroll can be." She stopped. She looked at him, her eyes narrowing. "Daniel," missed a spot on the glass, Naomi. She huffed a sound of profound irritation. But when she turned to the glass table, he saw the tension in her shoulders had melted away. The peace was an illusion. In Daniel's world, peace was just the deep breath you took before the water rushed in. It was a Tuesday night. Naomi wasn't supposed to be there, but a different maid had called out sick, and she had taken the overtime. Daniel was glad she was there. His lieutenants had been pushing back hard on his latest territory directives. The disrespect was no longer whispered, it was blatant. He was preparing to purge his inner circle. He was in his chair, facing the rain-lashed windows, listening to the rhythmic thwack of Naomi scrubbing the bathroom tiles. Then the lights went out. The hum of the HVAC system died. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and wrong. The backup generators, designed to kick in within 3 seconds, remained dead. Daniel's blood turned to ice. Sabotage. From downstairs, a dull, suppressed pop echoed through the floorboards. Then another. "Naomi!" Daniel barked, spinning his motorized chair around. She stepped out of the bathroom holding a bottle of bleach. Her brow furrowed in the dark. "Did a fuse blow?" "Get away from the door." Daniel ordered, his voice dropping into the lethal, gravelly command of a syndicate boss. "Get behind the bed, now." She didn't ask questions. The sheer terror in his tone was enough. She dropped the bleach and moved, scrambling around the massive mahogany frame and crouching on the floor. Daniel wheeled himself backward, positioning his chair in the shadowed corner of the room, facing the oak doors. He reached under his armrest. His fingers curled around the cold, textured grip of a suppressed Glock 19 mounted on a hidden bracket. He drew it, resting the heavy barrel on his dead thigh. Footsteps, heavy, hurried, moving up the grand staircase. They had bypassed the perimeter guards. They had killed the men downstairs. This wasn't a warning, it was an execution. "Daniel," Naomi whispered from the darkness. Her voice was shaking. "Keep your head down," he replied softly. "Do exactly what I say." The door handle clicked. Daniel didn't wait. He raised the weapon and fired 3 times through the heavy oak door. The muffled thwip, thwip, thwip was followed by a heavy thud in the hallway. "One down," Daniel muttered. His heart rate was steady. This was his element. Violence was the language he spoke fluently. But the cold sweat on his neck wasn't for himself. It was for the woman huddled behind his bed. The door was suddenly kicked open, the splintered wood flying inward. 2 men spilled into the room, sweeping the darkness with flashlights mounted to their weapons. Daniel fired, dropping the first man with a shot to the chest. But the second man was fast. He saw the muzzle flash from the wheelchair and returned fire. A bullet clipped the heavy metal frame of Daniel's chair. The impact was violent. The chair tipped backward, the motorized base whining as it lost balance. Daniel hit the floor hard, his head slamming against the carpet, the breath knocked out of his lungs. The heavy chair collapsed over his lifeless legs, pinning him. The Glock clattered out of his hand, skidding across the hardwood floor into the shadows. He was trapped, completely immobilized. The assassin moved into the room, his flashlight sweeping the floor, looking for the kill shot. He stepped over his dead comrade, raising his weapon toward Daniel's prone body. "Hey!" The voice was high, terrified, and loud. The assassin snapped his weapon toward the back of the room. From behind the bed, Naomi lunged. She didn't have a gun. She didn't know how to fight. But she had the heavy, industrial-sized bottle of bleach she had picked back up from the floor. With a desperate, feral cry, she hurled it. The plastic bottle struck the assassin directly in the face. It didn't knock him out, but it broke his nose. He staggered backward, cursing his flashlight beam wildly, swinging across the ceiling as he reflexively raised his hands to his bleeding face. It was exactly 2 seconds of distraction. Daniel, fighting through the dark spots in his vision, dragged his upper body forward. His fingers brushed the cold steel of the Glock. He gripped it, rolled onto his side, and pulled the trigger. The shot caught the assassin under the jaw. The man crumpled dead before he hit the rug. Silence slammed back into the room, deafening and thick, broken only by the sound of the rain outside and Naomi's ragged, hyperventilating breaths. "Naomi!" Daniel gasped, pushing against the heavy wheelchair, crushing his legs. He couldn't feel the pain, but he knew the weight was doing damage. "Naomi, are you hit?" She crawled out from behind the bed. In the ambient light from the city filtering through the window, he saw her shaking violently. She stared at the bodies on the floor, her eyes wide with shock. "I threw bleach," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I just threw bleach at him. You saved my life." Daniel said, his voice unusually gentle. "Come here. Help me get this chair off." She snapped out of her daze. She scrambled over to him, grabbing the heavy metal frame. Working together, they managed to heave the motorized chair off his legs. Daniel dragged himself up to sit against the base of the wall, his chest heaving. He looked at her. She had blood on her oversized uniform shirt, not hers, but the splatter from the man he had shot. She looked terrified, exhausted, and utterly broken. Daniel reached out. He caught her wrist, pulling her gently until she sank to the floor beside him. He didn't care about the blood. He didn't care about the impending war this night would bring. "You're done," Daniel said, his voice rough. Naomi swallowed hard, trembling. You're firing me." "Yes." Daniel said, his grip on her wrist tightening slightly, a physical anchor in the dark. "You are done scrubbing floors. You are done walking 3 miles in the rain. You are done worrying about your sister's medical bills." "Daniel, I told you I don't—" "I know what you told me," he interrupted, leaning his head back against the wall, his eyes fixed on her. "You don't want to be owned, and I don't want to own you. But you saved my life. By the rules of my world, my life belongs to you now." Naomi stared at him. The cynical, paralyzed boss of the city's worst nightmare was looking at her not as a maid, not as a civilian, but as an equal. "What does that mean?" she asked softly. "It means—" Daniel said, a genuine, unforced smile finally breaking across his face, "that you're going to stay here, and I'm going to make sure the rest of your life is very, very boring." Naomi looked at the bodies, then back at his smiling face. She let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "Boring sounds really good right now." She leaned her head against his shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her, holding her tight against his side. The sirens began to wail in the distance, his loyalists finally arriving. The war was just beginning outside his doors, but inside the room, sitting on the blood-stained floor, Daniel had finally found his peace. Did Daniel and Naomi's unconventional, heart-pounding romance leave you breathless? Love can blossom in the darkest, most unexpected places, even in the crossfire of a Mafia war. If you loved watching this ruthless, paralyzed boss find his humanity and smile again because of a fearless, hard-working woman, you're not alone. Hit that like button, share this incredible story with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more gripping, emotional romance dramas.